Welcome to the world, according to Mike Graham. Coming up in the show tonight, we're going to have a deep dive into the comeback kid, David Cameron. And also, of course, it will be Trump's takedown. So now it's time for my deep dive into former Prime Minister David Cameron, now, of course, Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton. I'm delighted to say that Ben Loughnane joins me. He's from the Bow Group, political commentator. Ben, nice to see you. I think everybody was incredibly surprised when David Cameron suddenly re-entered the cabinet, not least the BBC reporter who was standing down the street at the time, who said, I'm not sure if I saw right, but I think I just saw David Cameron going back in. But let's have a look at David Cameron, who doesn't actually look any older than he did when he was Prime Minister. This is his first appearance at PMQs.
Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating West Oxfordshire District Council, which at £40 has set one of the lowest council taxes in the entire country? Is he aware that this Conservative-controlled council is investing in recreation centres, in social housing and in doorstep recycling? And doesn't it show that you can have quality local services without fleecing taxpayers at the same time?
Actually, I say he hasn't aged. He's certainly aged from that particular moment. But, I mean, obviously, he's always been a very confident speaker. He's always been very posh. If you remember watching him doing that, would you have said at that point, that's the future Prime Minister?
I think he was raised for power. I think he was sort of groomed to be PM from a very young age as this sort of very moderate, you know, conservative but compassionate, that whole sort of breakdown, sort of end of the nasty party sort of era, heir to Blair. Right. And he effectively was Blair in blue.
Labour, wasn't it?
He was very blue Labour. And I think, you know, he always sort of had his eyes on the top job. That was his agenda from day one. He never wanted to fuss around with these meaningless cabinet positions. It was straight to the top for Dave. Yeah. And he got it. But I think he really messed it up. When he had the referendum, he left and he felt that he hadn't completed his sort of his agenda. Yeah. He felt he needed to come back, have one more lap around the track to leave a different legacy. Yeah. So I don't think it was that shocking that he came back. No,
maybe not. That particular clip from his first Prime Minister's Questions was 2002. Which unbelievably is 21 years ago, which is hard to imagine, isn't it? But interesting that you got recycling into it, because back in 2002, recycling wasn't something that we did a great deal of. I mean, we did a bit of it, I seem to remember. We used to do, I mean, I lived in Scotland back in those days, and there was a few bottle banks and things, but it wasn't the mass business that it is now.
Well, he was always on the new fads, wasn't he? He was always sort of trying to jump on these issues which you could pass off as being conservative, but were effectively quite liberal. You know, say, it's a conservative thing to do, to recycle. It was his sort of bridge between the two. And I think that was his whole agenda, you know, the whole sort of new conservative, the tree instead of the torch, that whole sort of idea. He wanted to really reshape conservatism. And he did, and I think probably for the worst.
I think definitely for the worst, considering where it is now. Let's have a look at his last Prime Minister's Questions. This was in 2016.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. Other than one meeting this afternoon with Her Majesty the Queen, the diary for the rest of my day is remarkably light. Well, let me say at the dispatch box how warmly I congratulate the Home Secretary on becoming leader of the Conservative Party. And when it comes to women Prime Ministers, I'm very pleased to be able to say pretty soon it's going to be 2-0. And the rumour that somehow I don't love Larry, I do. And I have photographic evidence to prove it. Sadly, I can't take Larry with me. He belongs to the House and the staff love him very much, as do I. I'm beginning to admire his tenacity. He is reminding me of the Black Knight in Monty Python's Holy Grail. He's been kicked so many times, but he says, keep going, it's only a flesh wound. I admire that.
I mean, he did have that advantage of being up against Jeremy Corbyn, didn't he?
Well, he was also just really very good at PMQs. It was one of his great talents. I don't rate him much as a Prime Minister or what he achieved, but at PMQs, he was hilarious. There's some great clips throughout his time as Prime Minister.
Do you think that's something to do with going to Eton, where they kind of teach you to have that sort of confidence and they give you that kind of belief that you can stand up in any scenario and just speak?
There's definitely a sort of an Eton and also Oxford sort of tradition of debate and sort of banter that sort of lends itself very well to Parliament. But I also think it's a natural talent. It's something you can't really teach.
Yeah, I think that's
just
true.
Don't have it.
And I mean, the thing is with him, and I was going to ask you this when you were talking about him taking the Conservative Party into a kind of a newer era, if you like. Do you think he was reacting to what some Conservatives wanted, or do you think he was leading it and has now dragged them all with him?
I think it was... No, I don't think it was what most of the party wanted. I don't think it's what most of the country wanted. I think he was part of a sort of a social sect where being Conservative was almost embarrassing. He was trying to reform the image of Conservatives among the sort of Notting Hill dinner party set who sort of looked down their nose.
Which kind of ironically is where he's now ended up, isn't it?
Exactly,
Because he's Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, which is about as champagne socialist as you can get, isn't it?
Baron Dave of Chipping Norton.
Exactly.
It sort of sums him up. Look, I don't think he'll be remembered well. I think when time passes and people look back, he'll be seen as largely a Prime Minister who didn't really leave a legacy, especially in the wake of Blair, who left an enormous legacy, which has changed this country from top to bottom.
Well, unfortunately for the worse in many
Indeed,
cases,
I agree.
I think. Let's have a look at him being sworn into Lord Dave, the House of Lords.
I, David, Lord Cameron of Chipping Norton, do swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles, his heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God.
I was told the other day that most of the Lords have to rent those costumes that they have to wear because they're so expensive. Was it you that told me that?
Yeah, I think it was because effectively it costs about 10 grand for the whole thing, and you wear it twice.
Right.
So a lot of people go, oh, I won't bother. But I'm sure he bought his own. I think he's been wanting that for a long time.
Well, I'm interested in a man who spent £23,000 on that little shepherd's hut in the back of his garden where he wrote his book, which is quite a large amount of money for a hut.
I reckon he's probably had those robes in his wardrobe for about 20 years, just waiting for his moment to become Lord Cameron.
Absolutely right. But, I mean, the reason for bringing him back still slightly baffles me. You know, he might want to come back, and you might say he wants to create a sort of slightly different legacy to leaving after the referendum in 2016. But I can't see how much use he's going to be, really, to Rishi Sunak. I've heard various stories. One is that the Tory party believes that he's an election winner, and therefore he can sort of coach them into having some decent campaigns. I'm not sure that's true.
That may have been true in 2010 or 2015, but it's not true now. I mean, I think he's probably one of the most universally loathed politicians in the country. Both left and right hate him for different reasons. You know, the Remainers hate him because he gave us a referendum. The Leavers hate him because he was a Remainer and campaigned for Remain. I mean, like, I don't see the electoral advantage. I also don't see the political advantage for Rishi Sunak to bring back a former Prime Minister who will end up being a thorn in his side. I think chances are this comes from the donors and the people who really control things behind the scene. Cameron is a grandee, they love him, but it's a very small section of the population who happen to just have a lot of control.
And it certainly hasn't pleased a lot of people who voted Tory at the last election, who voted Tory effectively to get Boris Johnson in to make sure that Brexit was done.
Yeah, and it does seem that the party has moved away from this sort of listening to the members and listening to the voters. I mean, Rishi Sunak really floated in without much in the way of
Well, if you
democracy.
think about it, I mean, I know that people will argue that they were elected at some point or other in their life, but Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and now David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, all unelected, effectively.
Yeah. And it does seem a little bit like the old 1700s Rotten Borough aristocratic approach. Oh, well, we have democracy in name only, but once we're in a closed room, we sort of bring in our friends and give them the top jobs. That's what it sort of feels like, and I don't think that will play well with the electorate in the next election.
No, I just don't think it will. Let's have a look at his first speech in the House of Lords.
The noble Lord Mandelson sent me a particularly charming welcome, but he pointed out that I am a comeback novice, and this is only my first one compared with his 3. I suppose my response should be to point out that to make 3 comebacks, you need both his prodigious talent and you need to be sacked twice by the Prime Minister, which is a fate I'm hoping to avoid.
There again, very charming. He didn't refer to him as the Dark Lord, which I would have preferred. But, Mandelson is another one who's come back, hasn't he? Because he's now pretty much got his hands all over Keir Starmer and the future policy direction of Labour, which is why we've seen Starmer sticking so rigidly to his no ceasefire thing.
Yeah, I also think this sets an alarming precedent in terms of Blair, because if Keir Starmer gets into power next year, and he turns around and puts Blair in the House of Lords and then appoints him to a cabinet position, no Conservative politician can turn around and say, you can't do that, because we set the precedent. It's on us if that happens. So,
and I mean, I think a lot of people would not like to see Tony Blair back on the public payroll.
I think certainly we wouldn't.
No.
I think most of the country wouldn't. But there's a lot of people, I think, in the Labour Party who would love to see a return of the Blairite era, because it's the last time they won.
Yes, I mean, that's his great strength. I mean, he is an election winner. He's the only one who actually, Labour, within living memory, who's actually won an election at all, incredibly. Ben, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Ben Lockname from the Bow Group there, with his appreciation, or otherwise, of David Cameron. How is it these people could be so useless and they keep getting better jobs? It's quite amazing. That was my deep dive. And now it's time for Donald Trump's takedown.
You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Let's go, Joe. Bring it on, because you are a corrupt person. You're the most corrupt president in our history. And by the way, the most incompetent president. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN.
That's the end of part one of The World According to Mike Graham. Coming up in the next section, we're going to be doing Prime Minister for the Week. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to The World According to Mike Graham. Coming up, my big apology to somebody you might know. But first, Prime Minister for a Week. So now it's time to meet the panellists for this week's Prime Minister for a Week. And I'm delighted to say that for the first time, I've got Ellie Wheatley here, who's with Guido Fawkes, one of the foremost places to go for political gossip and news. I've been in it many times, and I look forward to being in it many times more. Keith Fraser's here as well. You call yourself a polymath, Keith. Tell us what that means.
Well, I'm a professional property man. I do a couple of podcasts.
A man of
I'm
many
an author.
parts.
And I also a spokesman for and founder actually of the Israel Solidarity Movement,
Okay.
which of course is very, very apt in today's time.
You've got a book in front of you. Is that your new book?
It's not that new, but it's very pertinent to what we're going to discuss,
Is it?
Mike.
Okay.
So
And
I
it's
thought I'd
called-
bring it
and it's
along
called cojones.
and give it. I thought
A
I'd
word
come
I like
along
to see- it's a word
and
I
give
like
it
to
a plug.
A plug. There you go. Right. Well, Ellie, let's start with you straight away, because what this is a very fast-moving, devil may care segment where you can jump in, you can interrupt each other, you can say whatever you like, but whatever you do, don't take too long to say it. Ellie, what's your first one?
I would stop taxing young earners on their first £100,000 that they earn. Because
Yes.
first of all, it would encourage the young to enter the workforce. And of course, being a young person is very expensive. We don't own anything yet. And
Right.
traditionally, you obviously start
Being an old
off-
person is a lot more expensive, actually, because they have to pay for all the young people, but that's another story.
Well,
I mean, the ones that you have as children.
Well, obviously, other than having children, but once you get to mid-50s, you've pretty much got everything that you already need. Whereas we need to experience things. We need to. Yes, we do.
about that, Ellie, but
So you're saying the first 100 grand sort of
Yeah.
in total. So you wouldn't be making 100 grand
No,
a year.
no, no, no.
But
So
say
think
you're
of it-
making 25 grand a year.
Yeah.
4 years you don't pay tax.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't mind
Exactly
that. What do you think of that?
I think it's very, very good. Listen, I'm...
It's innovative.
I'm, I guess, a supporter of the low tax party.
Me too.
If there is one.
Yeah.
But, and I genuinely think that by low taxation and encouraging people to work rather than disincentivising them to not work, makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely, and it boosts the economy. It would pay for itself. So.
Yeah. But
100%.
wouldn't they all just save up their money and then not spend it, and then that wouldn't be good for the economy?
Well, if you know young people, they don't tend to save that much.
Well, they tell me it's because they haven't got any money to save.
Well, yeah, because we're being taxed so
Yeah.
highly.
And if you're fresh out of university, because obviously in university there's a lot of beer money being spent, and a lot of that goes to the tax man, isn't it?
Well, it does, but I'll tell you what really kills me is the amount of money that you have to, because I've got one son at university now, the amount of money you have to pay through the nose to make them actually even just go. You know, the accommodation costs are ridiculous, the fees are ridiculous. I'm lucky enough that when I went, it was free, you know.
Same here.
But there we are. Keith, what's your first one? This is
My
about
first
kids
one,
as well.
Yeah, my first one is to introduce a policy to teach the psychology of cojones in schools.
Yes.
What does that mean? Well, it has a number of different hats.
Yes.
But the main meaning, I would say in this case, is to be personally accountable for your life. No more pointing the finger at others, why you're not making me happy. When you point your finger at someone, you're pointing for yourself. So I say, take personal accountability of your life. Be unapologetic about yourself. You were born to stand out, not fit in, and be proud of that. And the other thing is, what I want to say, Mike, is that you take someone like Rishi Sunak. We live in a world of jealousy politics.
Yeah.
Labour politicians will say, oh, with the amount it costs to heat his swimming pool, all the backbenchers come out with it in Parliament, we could be doing this. Well, I tell you what, if they weren't jealous and they actually looked at the man and said, he is not on the Caribbean, he's actually, or sitting on a beach in the Caribbean, he's actually decided to give back to British society, a man who's made it on his own terms. He is a great guy who we can learn from in order to prosper. And is there anyone better to help the country prosper?
Yeah.
So be personally accountable and let's learn how to have cojones in schools, in unis, and we'll be a lot more happy and a lot more
Well, Ellie,
authentic.
let me put that directly to you. I mean, do you think that young people are always looking for an excuse not to do something?
I think so. I absolutely do agree with that, because I think we need to encourage people to not only hold accountability for what they do, but encourage them to take pride in what they do and not be pointing at others and pointing the blame at others for their failures. And if you incentivize young people, for example, to join the workforce, then they have something to be proud of. And yeah.
Yeah, I think responsibility is a good idea. I like that one as well. Because, I mean, if you take some of these Labour MPs who moan on about how much Rishi Sunak's swimming pool costs, well, a lot of them charge a lot more in expenses than his swimming pool costs to run for 5 years. So I think they can maybe teach themselves a little lesson there. Back to universities for you, Ellie.
Yes, well, I think we should privatise all UK universities, because I
thought they already had.
I think a lot of young people are told that they need to go to university because there's no other option.
Yeah.
And I think we should destigmatise the idea that if you don't go to university, you're not going to do well in life, when actually experience often pays a lot more.
Also,
than
it's become a two-tier society, hasn't it? Because an awful lot of people who don't go to university tend to go into other jobs which don't require a degree, which means that they feel in some way that they've missed out. It might be because they haven't got enough money in their family to be able to go, because I think most people who go to university now know that their family have to kind of help them out, because there isn't enough money in the system. And of course, Cameron screwed it up, didn't he? Because when he said to all universities, charge up to £9,000 a year, and they all went, right, the fee is £9,000. They didn't go, we'll charge 7. They charged 9.
I actually think, Mike, that Tony Blair messed it up, because if you remember rightly, it was Tony Blair's government, I believe, that introduced tuition fees.
Yeah.
But he said everybody should be going to university effectively. And that's why they created all these ridiculous
they're all
two-bob
businesses
degrees.
now, aren't they? But also, they're all businesses now, as we know from. I mean, part of the immigration problem we've got is all these foreign students coming in because the universities say, we need the money. So they're bringing as many foreign students in as they possibly can, and many of them come here, start a degree, don't finish it, and just stay anyway. Yeah, but that's another story. Keith, what's your next one?
So my next one is about street lighting. Over the last few years, street lighting. I've been walking the streets, driving through the streets, and thinking, do you know what? Is it my imagination, or are the street lights dimmer than they ever used to be? And I was talking to someone the other day when we had dinner.
Politicians are definitely dimmer than they used to be. The politicians are definitely dimmer than they used to be.
Well, at the end of the day, a few years back, we had a Green Party MP. What we had an MP for, he was a member of the Green Party, is another matter. But she said there should be a 6 p.m. curfew for men.
Yeah.
Really? I tell you what, why don't the councils stop wasting money, start spending their money wisely, and turn up the dimmer switch, because then it will be more safe for lovely young ladies like yourself to walk the streets. And even me, I don't feel great walking in my local streets where it's literally dark. And driving, by the way.
Yeah, you drive through a lot of places these days where there's a sign that says intermittent street lighting. And you're going, sorry, why is there intermittent street lighting? Why don't you just put it on? In my street, I woke up one day and they put this very much brighter light in, and it turns out they were LEDs. So instead of having those old-fashioned kind of yellow street lights, which weren't very good, it now looks like a studio set. Which actually is good, but it's very bright.
I would feel a lot safer if our streets were brighter, because under the cloak of darkness, a lot of dangerous things can go on.
Look, I walk my dog sometimes at night, and when it's raining and it's dark and the street lighting is dimmed right down, I'm thinking, you know what? This is not really that safe, especially as my dog's not an Alsatian, he's a golden retriever. But that's beside the point. At the end of the day, they need to turn up the dimmer switch, spend a bit of money, make it safe.
Well, do you know, and also in my street, I don't know if it's a particularly innovative place, but they've actually attached some electric plug-in sockets for cars on the streetlights, which actually is quite a good idea. I'm not a big fan of electric cars, but I mean, if you're going to have to charge them, plug them into a streetlight. Why not? Right, Ellie, your next one.
I would keep British summertime all year round, not put the clocks back in October, because people always complain every year. Oh, it's 4:30, it's already dark. 59% of people would back British summertime all year round. So it is a vote winner.
Yeah.
Not only would it obviously decrease crime, I think actually it would also be safer for our streets. There would be fewer pedestrian fatalities. One study said by 13%, and motor vehicle fatalities by 3%. So I think...
the purists, like Peter Hitchens, goes on about how we shouldn't ever change the clocks, but he would prefer to stick, I think, with Greenwich Mean Time.
Yes, he would, which I disagree
summertime.
with. Yeah.
So Greenwich Mean Time you don't like?
No, because when, obviously, when it gets dark, melatonin is triggered in the body. So when it gets dark at 4 o'clock, 4:30, people are encouraged to do more sedentary activities, like watching telly rather than getting out and about. I mean, we see it in summer that people are far more active.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's warmer, but the light also helps.
It's very weird in Scotland. I lived in Scotland for a while, and in the summertime there, it really doesn't get dark at all. You can play golf until about 11 o'clock at night, and the sun's coming up at sort of 2 a.m. But in winter, it's awful, because in winter, you can go into work in the morning in the dark and basically come home in the afternoon in the dark. Sometimes it only gets light for about an hour in the middle of the day, and if it's bad weather, you just don't see any light, and that's really depressing.
Yes,
for a lot
it
of people.
is.
It's depressing.
It's seasonal affective disorder.
And would that keep that? But that wouldn't keep us in line with anywhere else, would it? Because they still change the clocks in America. They still change the clocks in Europe, don't they?
Yes, but so?
Okay.
Who cares what the other countries do?
Device detox, it says here. What's that?
Okay, so here's my thinking. I believe, and I'm sure everyone would say the same thing, that the world is going through a mental health pandemic. Well, how about the government spend some money, like they do on party political broadcasts, and put out messages to put the phone away? You know what? People are so wedded to their device. We go to restaurants, we see families of 4 or 5 sitting there, and none of them are talking. They're on their phone. And I say it's very, very bad for mental health. Social media. I'm not a big fan of social media. I sometimes look at Facebook when I'm sitting on the toilet, I've got to be honest with you. And I look at some of the posts and I think, oh, happy birthday to my 2-year-old Tommy. And then pictures. Of course, Tommy's not on Facebook. They're wanting some sort of attention from others to say, oh, gorgeous picture, to give their emotional health some kind of fake attention.
People only always put the best bits as well. So, of course, you only see how amazing other people's lives are, which makes you feel worse about your own life. So, it does contribute to the mental health.
100%. The government needs to start spending some money.
Although I don't like government spending on that sort of thing, because what you can do, it's very simple. The restaurant just says, leave your phone. Don't get it out. If you take your phone out, you're banned from the restaurant.
Well, I agree with that as well.
I've been in bars where they do that, and they just go, this is a phone-free zone.
But in a world, Mike, where everybody's talking about mental health, if you really want to do something, I'm telling you, Rishi, out there, when you're watching this programme, to start investing in educating people about the perils of device overload. Start device detoxing, and everybody will be mentally healthier.
All right, well, maybe so. Well, listen, this is very innovative, all of this stuff, and I've really liked every single one of them. But I'm going to give it to Ellie because she's young, and I'm not. This is not ageist, right? But she's got a lot of really good ideas for young people, and I know that young people need some help. Even though, I was young once and I didn't get any help. I just did it myself. But there we are. So you can be Prime Minister, but listen, you can give him a job in the cabinet. Maybe you could be the Secretary of State for Health.
Absolutely.
And you could get somebody better than we've had for the last few years anyway. But that was, of course, Prime Minister for a week. And now, Apology of the Week. I thought maybe this week would be the week that I could give a break to the BBC. I thought maybe this week will be the week where they don't do anything that I have to have a go at them for. And I thought this week, maybe I'll take the opportunity to say sorry to the BBC for being quite so demonstrative, for being quite so hard on them. But unfortunately, this is not the week to do that. So my apology for the week is not to the BBC, and I'll tell you why. They've got a bloke who works for them called Richard Bilton. He's a panorama presenter, and he goes on and on about climate change. In fact, he's a climate change presenter for them. But he told us all that we shouldn't be flying around the world so much because it damages the planet. And you know, when he did this, on the show, he flew to Dubai, Alaska, California, and Berlin. So Richard, or Dick, as I like to call him, keep your senses to yourself. Keep your opinions to yourself. Don't tell us what to do. And I'm not sorry. Take a long flight off a short pier. Thanks for watching The World According to Mike Graham. We'll be back same time next week.